Just about a year ago, I showcased a shell mod that converted a Switch handheld console into a dedicated home console. Doing this increased the system's cooling capacity, allowing it to run overclocked with surprisingly low temperatures. While this mod proved to be very popular with the community, there were several things that they wished could be improved, which is where the second generation of this mod comes in, with better parts, new custom circuit boards, new features, and a litany of other enhancements, making this what I call the Switch Pro mod. So let's dive in and check it out. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today we're going to be taking a look at the latest iteration of what I like to call the Switch Pro Shell mod. This is an update to the TV kit from SET that I covered last year. It follows the same ethos of giving the Switch extreme cooling capabilities, allowing an overclocked modded console to run full tilt without breaking a sweat. Literally. With performance boosted to nearly twice the clock speeds of a standard stock Switch, the new shell keeps the temperature very low, barely getting over 50 degrees Celsius. It almost makes you wonder why Nintendo never released a version of the Switch like this and just slapped the Pro name on it and charged you a whole bunch of money. Running the system overclocked allows you to get pretty consistent 60 frames per second on some of the most demanding games, all the while maintaining temperatures just a hair above what a stock console would be. Alright, so what makes this kit different and more importantly, better than the previous version? Well, I'm glad you asked because it's a lot. I'll be going over all the changes later on in the video, but to name a few of the big ones, we first have the custom fan controller board that shuts off the fan when the console is in sleep mode or shut down. The prior model actually required you to disconnect the Switch from power in order to shut the fan down, which was pretty inconvenient. Also, we now have external access to the USB Type-A ports as well as the micro SD card slot thanks to a custom SD card extender. And of course, one of the most requested changes from the original shell was the use of an ultra-quiet Noctua fan. This one here is 92mm, which is absolute overkill for this type of mod, and is why it stays so cool even when overclocked, which I'll demonstrate later on in the video. And the last change, and probably the most significant in my opinion, is the actual design and construction of the new shell. Unlike the prior version, which used parts that were press-fit together, SET's approach this time around is extremely modular, making use of over 60, yes you heard me, 60 individually hand-set brass inserts. This thing is now super easy to assemble. It can be all put together with just a screwdriver, no soldering, glue, or special tools required. Which actually brings me to the sponsor of today's video, Linus Tech Tips. The folks over at LTT were kind enough to send over their brand new precision multi-bit screwdriver for me to try out. And I have to say, it's pretty awesome. The screwdriver has a premium anodized aluminum handle that feels great in the hand with a decent amount of heft, and a smooth spinning end cap, which is super satisfying to use, especially as a fun little fidget toy. I think this thing can spin forever. Plus, inside the handle, there's built-in storage for up to 3 of your favorite or most used bits that also spins with a very satisfying opening and closing action. It of course also features a strong magnetic tip that keeps your bits secure while also letting you pick up screws with ease. Another great thing about the Precision driver is that it's compatible with pretty much any 4mm driver bit, so if you already have a bit set, you can get the Precision driver as a standalone unit and still use your old bits. However, you can also pair it with the LTT Precision bit set and case, giving you a versatile setup for pretty much any project. The set includes 60 different 4mm bits with longer shanks, which is great for reaching some of those recessed, hard-to-reach screws. As for the case, it's designed with a detachable magnetic hinge, so the lid can double as a parts tray, which is also magnetic. And on top of that, pun intended, you can stack the bit tray on top. This thing is loaded with magnets, so everything just sets and clicks into place. Overall, this is a quality, well-thought-out premium toolset, and if you're interested in picking one of these up, you can check it out using the link down below. And again, a huge thank you to Linus Tech Tips for sponsoring this video. Okay, so when you order SET's new shell, it'll be delivered to you in a semi-assembled state. So in order to put the kit together, you first need to disassemble it. It's a very easy and straightforward process, and again, all you need is a screwdriver. Here on screen, I'm showing you how to take it apart, of course using the LTT precision screwdriver. Then after this, I'll show you how to install the switch into it. Now, this may not be the most interesting footage in the video, but I did want to make it so folks can easily reference it later on, if and when they get their own shell, as taking the shell apart can be a bit daunting if you're going into it blind. I also made timestamps in the description so you can skip around to the parts you want to see, such as the performance testing of the new shell, or how to put the kit together. Alright, so now that we have the kit fully apart, I'll now show you how to install the switch into it. Now, I don't show you how to disassemble the Switch console itself, as there are plenty of videos online for that, so this tutorial assumes that you already have a fully disassembled Nintendo Switch console. Anyway, to start the build, we'll first install the LCD screen. This is optional and not completely necessary, but it is useful to have it when you're using a modded Switch and maybe need to debug things in the future. When installing the screen, you want to ensure that all 3 ribbon cables are passed through to the other side without being pinched. Once you have confirmed that all the ribbons are passing through properly, you can then install the screen retaining bezel using 8 screws. Next, we'll flip the bottom of the shell over and install the enclosure side housing, which is secured with 8 more screws here inside the shell, and then 2 more fastened on the bottom. Now for this next part, you can see that I already attached the battery to the battery tray. One thing to keep in mind is that when removing the battery from the original Switch, you need to be very careful to not damage it. I definitely recommend checking videos on how to properly remove the Switch battery. Anyway, now we're going to place the power and volume button board into this recess here on the battery tray, ensuring that the ribbon is being passed through this channel here. And to make this next step easier, place the shell on its side like this, and then place the switch power button and volume rocker covers as shown, ensuring that they are properly oriented. Then you can place the silicone membrane on top. Once those are in place, you can then put the battery tray on top as shown. Then confirm that each of the buttons actuate properly, and if they do, you can secure the battery tray with 3 screws. Next, I'm going to go ahead and drop in the stock switch fan. This is secured using the longer machine screws that are also included with the kit. During this step, you need to ensure that the power button ribbon cable, which is run underneath the fan, is not being overly pinched, so do not over tighten the fan screws. Next, we can go ahead and drop in the switch motherboard. Then secure it using 6 of the included self-tapping screws. Now we can go ahead and connect these 4 ribbon cables to the motherboard. Using the included retaining bracket, we can now secure the Bluetooth antenna. Next, drop in the game cart reader, and then press in the Molex connector to the motherboard. And again, we'll be securing it using some more of those self-tapping screws. Now, when we get to the screws near the headphone jack, we need to first place this retaining bracket because it does help distribute the clamping force of the screws, since this part of the PCB is fairly delicate. It is very important that you do install this retaining bracket. Then we can go ahead and connect this ribbon cable. Now, before I install the heatsink, I'm going to go ahead and apply the perfect amount of thermal paste to the SoC heat spreader. Ah yes, that is perfect. Next, we can go ahead and drop in the game cart cowl. Then we're going to go ahead and connect the battery to the motherboard and secure it with the retaining bracket. This would be actually a very good time to check that everything is working as it should. Since we have the screen connected, we can just power the unit on to do this. And it looks like everything is working, so we can go ahead and disconnect the battery as we proceed with the rest of the install. Now we're going to prep the micro SD extender by attaching the ribbon cable as shown, and then connect it to the switch SD card reader. Now, before mounting the SD card extender, make sure the Wi-Fi antenna is routed through this channel here. And when securing the extender, do not place a screw here. I am making a mistake here, and I do actually end up removing this later on, but definitely do not fasten a screw here, otherwise you will have issues with reading SD cards. Now we can install the SD card retaining bracket. And again, do not place a screw here. Next, you're going to want to fold the ribbon cable like this, and then install the battery again along with the retaining bracket. Next, we can install the battery cover as shown, ensuring that the ribbon cable can pass through the cutout. Here you can see how the ribbon cable is able to pass through the bracket. Now we can connect the USB connector from our donor dock to the motherboard, and then fish the retaining bracket over the flex ribbon cable as shown and secure it to the shell using 2 screws. Now we can drop in the mid-frame, being cognizant to pass through the fan wire, Wi-Fi antenna, and micro SD card extension ribbon cable. Next, we can go ahead and attach the USB-C ribbon cable to the dock mainboard. and then tuck the ribbon cable underneath the fan and mount the dock mainboard to the midframe. Next, we can drop in the fan controller board, being sure to not forget to pass the SD card extension ribbon cable through. And then, at an angle, insert the two USB connectors into the dock mainboard as shown. And then secure the fan controller board to the midframe. Now, all we need to do is connect the fan wire to the fan controller board, as well as to power from the dock mainboard using the included JST connector. And then, lastly, connect the SD card extension ribbon cable to the fan controller board. Now all that's left to do is to drop the top shell on and button it all up. And there you have it, folks. We have fully installed this switch into the Pro Shell mod. What I absolutely love about this kit is just how easy it is to put together. You can tell that set really put a lot of time and effort into designing the layout of the shell, taking into consideration ease of assembly, and just having an overall modular setup that's easy to disassemble in case you need to troubleshoot. Overall, just an elegant design. But now let's quickly go over some of its features before we dive later on into how it performs. So on the surface, this looks very similar to the Legacy case, but there are a few key differences. Here on the side, we now have external access to two USB Type-A ports, which makes charging and pairing controllers quite a bit easier. And we now also have a microSD card slot, which was not something that was accessible on the Legacy shell. This was all made possible thanks to the custom fan controller board, which integrates all these components and is a considerable quality of life improvement over the previous version. Around top, we still have the massive Xbox One style exhaust vents, and all throughout the sides, we have a bunch of air inlets, so this thing pushes quite a bit of air through the system to cool all the internal components. Another great feature is that the fan now shuts off when you either put the system to sleep or power it down. Again, the previous model actually had the fan running all the time unless you unplugged it from power. Now I know this feature is a no-brainer that it should always have come like this, but it was actually not trivial to get the fan to power down when the console either enters sleep mode or is powered off. This took quite a bit of engineering to figure out and is probably the single biggest new addition to the shell. So kudos to Set and his team for figuring it out. And speaking of the fan, we now have a Noctua one that's 92mm in size. This thing pulls a ton of air through the console and is surprisingly quiet. This was one of the most requested upgrades from the previous version, which used an unbranded fan that was actually kind of loud. And another nice touch that Set included with this version of the shell is the integrated LED power indicator, which is in this sort of GameCube orange color, which also turns on and off as the console comes in and out of sleep mode, really tying the whole build together and showing how refined it has become. And right below the LED are the power and volume buttons, again very accessible here in the front, along with the cart reader here on the right side of the system. And around back, we of course have the USB-C port for power, HDMI, and the Ethernet jack. Taking a look at the bottom, we again have access to the screen, which isn't really here for playing games, but rather to be used to help debug any issues you may be having with the system if you, for example, are using a modded Switch. Oh, and the last thing I want to mention is the optional vertical stand that can be purchased separately. This actually was another customer request, so yet again, Set answered the call. If you want to have an overall smaller footprint for wherever you end up placing your Switch, this is definitely a great option to have. Altogether, this makes for a very convincing, dedicated home console version of the Switch, which again seems like something Nintendo could have easily accomplished as another product line on the other end of the spectrum of the Switch Lite, which as we all know was a dedicated handheld. Anyway, all that aside, let's get into what I'm sure you are all interested in, which is how this shell performs. Now to showcase this, I'll be playing some Tears of the Kingdom, which is one of the more graphically demanding games on the Switch, especially here in Kakariko Village, which is where I'll be running the test. I'll be playing the modded Switch at over double the clock speeds of an original console in both the modded shell as well as one in the stock shell. The one in the stock shell will of course be docked so that they are both running at the same resolution. And I'll also be showcasing the console in the stock clock speeds in the stock case to serve as a sort of baseline to compare our results. Do keep note that all these tests are run under the same conditions with an ambient room temperature of 73 degrees Fahrenheit, and all consoles are modded so I am able to overclock them. Now here to start off, I'm playing Tears of the Kingdom on a system that's running at stock specs, which as you can see is about 1000 MHz for the CPU, 770 MHz for the GPU, and 1600 MHz for the RAM. I also set the target frames per second of 30 or 30 FPS, and after getting the system up to temp after about 20 minutes of gameplay, we can see that the SoC, or System on Chip, is running at around 48 degrees Celsius, almost 49. This, in my opinion, is a temperature we're most concerned about, since the SoC is home to the CPU, GPU, and the RAM, meaning this is the critical temperature metric that we want to pay attention to and to keep as cool as possible for not only performance purposes, but also longevity of the chip. The PCB temperature follows the SoC pretty closely, and I assume this measures the temperature somewhere on the motherboard near the SoC, and the skin is, from what I gather, a calculated approximation of the temperature within the shell. Anyway, with a baseline of around 49 degrees Celsius on a stock system, let's bump up the specs to the max and see what we get. Again, this is still going to be inside of a stock shell. Okay, so I set the CPU to 2300 MHz, which is over double the stock clock speed. The GPU to nearly 1200 MHz, and the RAM to 2300 MHz with a target FPS of 60. So at this bumped up spec, we are now running considerably hotter. The SoC is now at 61, which is nearly 12 degrees Celsius hotter than stock. The PCB is around 57, and the skin is running at 50. So we can see that the extra power running through the SoC for the increased performance is definitely causing things to get pretty warm. But now let's shift over to the modded switch with the increased clock speeds inside SET's all-new custom shell with improved cooling capacity. And after running it for about 20 minutes, we can see that the temperature of the SoC settled around 51 degrees Celsius, which is pretty close to the stock temps of 48 degrees. The PCB is around 41 degrees Celsius, which is actually considerably lower than the stock unit by almost 8 degrees, and the skin metric is also a hair lower than stock. The results honestly speak for themselves. Running the switch at full tilt when inside SET's custom shell gives us temps that are very close, if not better, than running a completely stock switch. And I'm guessing, depending on the binning of your particular chip that you have in your console, you could conceivably get even better temps. SET sent me a few screenshots of his modded switch running at the same clock speeds under the similar conditions that I was running my consoles at, and achieved even lower temps. And these results are consistent or better depending on what game you play. Anyway, now that we've seen how the shell performs, let's go over the pros and cons. Starting with the pros, I think the standout one is the updated and improved design. SET combed through all the comments in my previous video, took your feedback to heart, and made some fantastic changes to this new shell. The most requested feature? A Noctua fan. Well, guess what? We got one. External access to the micro SD card slot, you asked for it, and it's here. This is a textbook example of what happens when a company truly listens to its customers. Another thing I love about the kit is just how easy it is to put together. I absolutely love that SET used brass inserts instead of the alternative of screwing directly into the 3D printed material. It's an overall much more refined build experience, and it just comes together so easily. Additionally, this is a great mod for those that have a Switch with a broken screen. This gives broken systems a sort of second lease on life as a dedicated home console. On the other side of the token, this is also a completely reversible mod, meaning if you have a working console, you can install it into this shell and then revert it back if you want to return it to stock condition. And lastly, let's talk about price. As of right now, you can pre-order the shell for $110, with the stand being sold separately for an additional $15. Now, I know that sounds pretty steep, but the amount of work to develop and design the shell, as well as all of the parts that need to be individually printed, not to mention the sheer amount of hand-placed brass inserts, screws, and custom circuit boards, I actually kind of think this is a bargain. Anyway, overall, this is a fantastic kit, and there is a lot to like about it. But now let's get into the cons. And honestly, I really can't think of any. The previous version of the kit definitely had a few issues, but every single one of them has been addressed in this new version, and then some. I even love the design. Okay, I may be a bit biased with the huge Macho Nacho logo, but the angular, minimalist design I think will have a lot of broad appeal. SET offers this in custom colors, and you may even be able to do custom logos, but that will be done on a case-by-case basis. No pun intended. Anyway, if you want to pick one of these up, you can head over to SET's Etsy store, which is now taking pre-orders. Do keep in mind, this is currently just for V1 and V2 revisions of the Switch, with an OLED version coming out in the near future. Also, one thing SET wanted me to emphasize is that there is about a 2-month wait time for these to take delivery if you order them today. He is a small business and is printing and putting these kits together all by himself. So if you do order one, I just ask that you be a little bit patient, as it will take some time to deliver. I'll have Set's Etsy store linked down below for those that are interested. Oh yeah, and don't forget to check out the LTT Precision Screwdriver while you're down there. Well folks, there you have it. A fantastic shell mod that gives us a reliable, cool running, overclocked Nintendo Switch. Now if you enjoyed this video, I really think you'll like this one here, so check it out. And as always, thank you all so much for tuning in today. Happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you again next time.